So hello everyone, and thank you for watching. The reason I'm making this video is to give you all a tutorial of what you need to know in Microsoft Access in order to get Lab 1 done. So in this video I'll just cover some simple stuff like creating a database, creating tables, creating primary keys, setting up relationships, and entering the data into the tables. I'm not going to cover in this video the forms and reports and all of that stuff. That stuff you'll need to know for Lab 2, but I'll make another video for that next week. So this will just cover some simple stuff. Now I'm using Access 2013 in this video because the lab manual, you'll notice, talks mostly about Access 2010 and has screenshots from Access 2010. So I know there's a bunch of people who are using the newer version this semester, 2013. So hopefully this video will be useful for those of you who are on the new version. The two versions are pretty similar. The only differences really are just where the options are hidden on the screen and maybe the naming differences in certain buttons, but otherwise they're very similar, just like with most Office products. Okay, so I'm going to fire up Microsoft Office 2013, Access 2013. So what I'm going to do first is create a blank desktop database. These other ones are templates, which you can use if there's a certain type of database you're creating that's kind of a standard thing like issue tracking, contacts, whatever. But for this class we're only going to start with blank databases. So let's hit blank database. Now it wants to know where to store this thing, and I should mention that if you're using Remote Lab, you want to store this on your H drive. Do not try to store it on the C drive because that will get cleared out when you log out of the computer. So I'm on my local computer, so I'll use the C drive. Now for this video, I'm going to show how to make a very simple database that you would use to store information about a bookstore. So I'm going to call this bookstore. Now when you make your database for your labs, you could call it Lab 1 or whatever you want, but I'm going to call mine bookstore because it will be a bookstore database. If you want to change where you store it, you click this folder, but let's just leave it on my C drive since I'm not using Remote Lab. Okay, so now I have my database. So what is it showing me? I'm not going to go into all the different buttons and all these menus just because most of it we won't need to use this week or even next week. So I'll just stick to what you need to know this week. So what do we need to do? Well, on the left it's showing me all my database objects. So far I just have table 1 because that's kind of like the default table it creates. I don't need that. So I'm just going to click this little X and that table disappeared. So basically now I have a completely blank database. I would like to create a table. That's the first thing you do in Access. Now I'm going to make a very simple bookstore database with only 3 tables. Normally a bookstore database would have a lot more, but I'm just going to simplify things down as much as I can just to make a database that will show the minimal, things you need to know right now. So I'm going to click on this Create tab, and I want to do Table Design. Now don't click on Table, because if you click Table, it won't let you specify the options properly for all of your columns. And so let's do Table Design. That's the best way to create a table. So I think the first thing I want to do is create a customer table. So what do I need to do? Well, first I have to decide what fields I want to store. Now, hopefully you've read some of the materials for this week, so you know about primary keys. Well, the idea is you want to have one field that makes every row in your table unique. This is a customer table, and there can be several customers with the same name, so obviously name is a bad choice. But in Access, you have something called an auto number, which basically is a type of key where it will assign an incrementing number to each record. So I'm going to create something called customer ID, and I'm going to pick auto number. Now this description column is where I could type a little note to myself about what this column is. I could just say assigns number to each customer. So this is optional to put something here. That's kind of like a little bit of documentation. So anyway, I've got my customer ID. Now let's put in a customer name. Now we want to split the name into first, middle, and last usually. So let's make a customer first name. Now I'm going to pick text here because it's just somebody's name, not any kind of number or anything. Now it's got a field size here. It defaults to 255, but I doubt a name would be that long. Let's maybe put 50. And then if I click here, I can go to my next field. Let's create a customer last name. Let's make that 50. Something I should have mentioned a second ago is it's a good idea to decide what fields are required and which are not. So actually you can see where it says required here. So if you want to ensure that whenever a record is added, there's always a first name and last name for that customer, you can change this to yes. And let's go do that for first name also. Now I'm also going to store customer middle initial. Let's put MI. Now in this case, since I'm just storing one character, let's make the field size 1. And I'm actually not going to make customer middle initial required because some people don't have middle initials. So I'll leave that required equals no. Now you notice that when I'm creating my column names, I'm using a certain prefix before each name. In this case I'm saying customer, first name, customer, last name. The reason I do this is if I had another table, for example like an employee table, it was also storing first and last name, I might call those columns employee first name, employee last name. Now I could use the same column name in different tables, but if you're creating reports and that kind of thing, it could be easier if you're joining tables to actually have some kind of prefix so you know which table this column first name is coming from. Is it coming from a customer table, an employee table, or what? So it's a choice. You can choose not to have a prefix, that's fine. But it's just a preference of mine. Let's put in customer street address 1, customer street address 2. That's kind of like a apartment number or something. Let's do customer phone. Now in this case you might wonder, do I put this as a number field? Well actually you only want to use number fields if it's something you'll do some kind of math operation on, like summing something or checking if a value is greater than some kind of value. But you can't really do any kind of math on a phone number, like you can't sum up people's phone numbers or something. So if it is a number, but it's not something that you want to treat in any kind of numerical way, you can just leave it as text. Also, some people might want to store like an extension number or something in the phone number that's not actually a numeric value, so let's leave it as text. Let's do customer. Oh, you know what I forgot is I forgot the city and state. Let me just finish putting in email. So customer email, it's another text. If you want to insert a column, the column order doesn't really matter to the database, but when you're entering the data, it can be helpful to have it in a certain order that makes sense. So let's just add in customer city text, customer state. Now for state, I'm actually going to limit it to the 2-character state code. So let's change the field size to 2. And I can just put 2-character code just to remind myself that that's what I'm doing. And let's add one more for zip code. I think I'll store the 9-digit zip code here, so let's put 9. Now what did I... Oops. Okay, that was a mistake. Let's put 9 here. Okay, so email, let's set our field sizes. That's 100. I also forgot to put in the required fields. So is email required? Let's say no, because some people don't like to give a bookstore their email address. Phone number, well, we might not know the customer's phone number. Maybe leave that blank. Okay, so with zip code, we've got, let's make address required. We'll just say the business rule is we have to know the city and state. You could argue either way on that, but just for demonstration purposes, we'll make the city, state, and zip required. Maybe address line 2 not required. Address line 1 yes required. Okay, so now we have all our columns now for the customer table. Now I mentioned before that customer ID would be our primary key. So we've made it an auto number, which is good, but we have to actually tell Access that this column is also a primary key. So we select the column and click this primary key icon, and then we can save our table. Let's hit save. Let's call it customer, and you can see now it's listed here, and we'll close out design view. Now if we want to actually enter data, what we can do is double click this table and it will go into data view. Now let's select all of our columns like we do in Excel. Double click here, make them wider. So you can see that in this view I'm actually going to type in all my data, and these columns here match the columns that I created in the design view. So maybe I'll put myself here. Oh, my zip code column is very small. Let me make it bigger. The reason it's making that noise is I'm trying to type in more than 9 characters and I'm not allowed to, so it cut me off. Customer phone. Email. Okay, so we've got one customer here. If you want to make sure it saves that row, just click on the next row. You don't actually have to remember in Access to hit the save button. The only thing you have to specifically save is design changes to tables or other objects that we'll learn later, like forms and reports. But as far as data goes, as long as you switch rows after typing your data, it'll save it. Okay, so let's put in another customer. Now you'll notice I'm going to leave the middle initial blank because I did not make it required. Okay, so I've got a second customer, and you'll notice the customer ID here says new because I haven't added a third customer, but as soon as I type something, you can see, oh, it changed to 3 because that's the auto number that's being used as the primary key. Now let's see what happens if I try to leave Jane's address blank. It should stop me from saving the row because we made street address a required field. So let's see what happens. Okay, so now when I try to switch rows, yeah, it's telling me I must enter a value in customer.customerStreetAddress. Right, because it's required. So let's put in something here. Okay. Now let me save the row. So there's one thing we can improve here. you'll notice that the zip code and the phone are not formatted very nicely. If we want to improve that and format it nicely, let's close out of the data view, and then we'll right-click on Customer and go to Design View. Now in Design View, what we can do is go to the Customer zip column, and it has this thing in Access called an input mask, which basically just tells Access how you want a certain field formatted. And it contains certain common fields, like you can see here. So this is a 9-digit zip code. We want it to put in the dash just to make it more readable, so we'll hit Finish here. And for phone, let's also, input mask. Let's pick phone number. It's just, sometimes if you make certain changes, it will prompt you to save. Just hit yes. So now we'll put in phone number, hit Finish. Now we'll hit Save. Save our table design, close it out. Now when we double click here to go to the data view, you'll notice the format looks nice now for the zip and phone. And if we add one more customer, you notice how it's putting in this dash here to help me type it in. And when I type in the phone number, it's putting in the nice little parentheses and dashes. Let's leave that blank. Yep. Okay, so now what's interesting is it's not actually storing the dash in the table or these parentheses. So this is still a 9-character field, but when it displays the zip code and when it lets you enter the zip code, it'll display this dash and these parentheses, just to make it a little easier to type and to view the data. So we've got one table created. Now another thing we want to keep track of, since this is a bookstore, would be books. So let's create another table. Go to Create, Table Design. Now for our primary key for the book table, we have two choices. One of them is to use what's called a natural key, which is something in a data entity that is unique. For example, books have ISBN numbers, which I'm not sure if they're unique, but it sounds like they should be. It's like a 10-character code that's different for each book. So you could use that as your key, and then you wouldn't need Access to create an auto number for you for each book. But I don't know much about those ISBNs and whether they can ever repeat. So just for demonstration purposes, let's actually just make this book ID. Let's just use our own key that Access is going to generate. In some databases I've worked in HR, we've used Social Security number as the primary key because that is supposedly unique for each person and isn't supposed to change, though it's slightly possible it could. But later on we actually were told not to do that because, well, you're not supposed to use personal information as a key. That was kind of the rule that we were breaking for a while. So sometimes it's good to just let the database generate a key. Because, for example, with books, there used to be an ISBN 10 and now there's an ISBN 13. So I can imagine a lot of databases are being rewritten because there's a new type of ISBN. So let's just go with our own key. For each book we'll store the title. Text is fine. Let's make title required. Now let's store the author. Now normally if we were making a real database, we would make a separate author table and link it in to our book table, but just for demonstration, let's just make that a text field. Let's make it required. Each book is going to have, we would probably also have a publisher table with a publisher ID to link in, but let's not worry about that either. We're just going to make 3 tables. Book publisher, We can make that required. And let's say book year, that's the year published. Now for the year, this is something where you could use a date time. You could store it that way. Since we're only storing the year, I would prefer probably to use just a number field, because if you're storing the full date, you're also storing the day and the month, and we don't really keep track of that for books, just the year. So let's just make it a number. We'll just store the 4-digit year. 4-digit year book is published. Just a note to myself there. And finally, I don't know, book pages. Okay, so pages, that's a good thing for a number. And finally, let's do the price. So price, actually, we don't want to just pick number because, well, number defaults to an integer, and obviously prices have decimals. Access has a built-in data type called currency, which is good for storing monetary amounts because it defaults to having 2 decimal places, which is perfect for dollars and cents. So anyway, let's say that's what we want to store. Let's see, price. I always forget to make things required. Pages, year. Okay, that looks good. And don't forget to put on your primary key. Let's make it book ID. And that should be it for this table. Let's hit save. Let's call it book. And it should appear right here. Good. We can close out design view. So let's go and add some books. Okay. Book title. Okay. Oh, oops. Publisher. Who knows? Okay, book year. Book pages, that was a big one. Okay, let's say that's $12.99. Okay, and because it's a currency field, you can see how it formats it nicely with a $sign and a decimal point. Okay, let's add another book. Let's make this wider. Oops. It thought I was trying to save without finishing. Okay, book author. So what would happen if we tried to put in some kind of text field, text value here? Oop, not allowed. The value entered does not match currency. So that's Access protecting you. That's something you don't get from a spreadsheet, at least not easily. So databases are really good about protecting you from invalid data if you're careful. Also book pages, you know, if I tried to put some letters in there, it would stop me. Okay, maybe we can add one more book. Okay, so we've got 3 rows in our book table. How many customers? 4 customers, good. So we're just going to make one more table. So normally we would have a lot more tables like publishers and authors, but let's just make one more table called the sales table. Now the sales table is going to store information about what books were sold to which customers. So this will let us finally create some relationships after we make this table, because you see the book table has no relationship to the customer table, you know, just between them. But when we create a sales table, that sales table is going to link the 2 tables together. So let's do create table design. Now, it's good to have some kind of unique identifying field for a sale. This is helpful for reporting or auditing or just keeping track of, you know, some kind of number that represents a sale, like sale 932. You know, that's a number you can easily look up. So it's good to generate a key for something like a transaction or a sale or, a purchase. Let's just call it sale ID. So again, this is just an auto number Access will assign. Now here's the interesting part. Our business rule is going to say that a sale consists of a certain book being sold to a certain customer for a certain number of copies. So we're going to add a book ID column, which will become the foreign key to the book table. Now, what would be the data type we should use? I'll give you guys a minute to think. Try to think, what data type should we use for book ID? Now, if you said auto number, unfortunately that would be incorrect, because we don't actually want access to assign a number in this column, because we actually want to choose for each row we enter into the sale table which book was sold. We don't want it putting in its own number. So this we're just going to have as a number field. Now the book ID is an auto number in the book table, but in the sales table it's just going to be a number, because it's a primary key in the book table, but it's going to be a foreign key in the sales table. That's a bit of a tricky concept. If you can figure out that concept in your head, you pretty much can understand databases, because foreign keys are really the most important thing in a database, because without them you have no relationships and you might as well just have a bunch of spreadsheets or files. Okay, so book ID and customer ID. Okay, also a number. Now, we also want to keep track of which quantity of book was purchased. So like 3 copies of something, for example. So that's a number. We also would like to know the sales date. Excel has a convenient data type called datetime, which we should use. So, what needs to be required? I always forget to do that. Book ID should be required. Customer ID. Actually, everything should be required. Oops. Okay, now sales ID, or sale ID, auto number is always required, so you don't have to specify that. So let's make this our primary key. Select the column, click primary key. Okay, so that's what we need. Let's hit save, and let's call this sale. Now you notice I'm using singular nouns like sale, customer, book. You could also choose to use names like sales, customers, books. Just be consistent in your naming. That's really what's most important. You don't have to follow the same naming convention as others as long as you're consistent in your database. If you're not consistent, people get confused when they look at the different tables. Okay, so it's saved. We have 3 tables. Close it up. Now there's one more thing I just realized we want in our book table. Actually, do we have it there? Oh, we do have price. Okay, never mind. Alright, so now we have our 3 tables. Now before we enter any sales data, I think we should add our relationships. Because right now, this book table doesn't know it's related to these other tables. But we want to make this table, this sale table, set up so that we can only enter sales for books and customers that exist in the book and customer table. That's the kind of validation we want the database to do. That's what you get from a database that you don't get from any other of the simpler technologies like spreadsheets. So to create relationships, also known as foreign keys, you're going to go back to create, and you're going to hit database tools and click on relationships. So what it's going to give you is this sort of work area where you can drop your tables on and then drag the columns to connect the tables and make these relationships. But first you have to decide which tables will participate in these relationships. Well, we want all 3, so you just click on one table, click add. Now make sure you don't click add again, because it will add the book table again. Click customer, So right now we're not creating tables, new tables or anything. We're just creating a little diagram to tell Access how to organize our relationships. So those are the three tables. You can see where the primary keys are. You can see the table name and the columns. So like I mentioned before, our business rule is that each sale will be, one book sold to one customer in a specific quantity on a specific date. So let's put the sale table actually in the middle, because that will be sort of our linking table. So what do you need to do? Well, what you need to do is connect the columns from the different tables. Now, what you'll start with is, let's say start with the book table. So what we want to say is the book ID column in the book table is related to the book ID column in the sale table. So we're going to drag the column from the book table into the sale table. You always start by grabbing the column from the table in which it is the primary key. Now it makes this little pop-up. Now what does it say? It's basically saying it's going to create a relationship in which you need the book ID to be present in the book table before that book ID can be added to the sale table. Okay? Now when I hit enforce referential integrity, that is what's going to force Access to check that we're only entering sales for books that exist in the book table. This cascade update, that, and cascade delete, that is used if you have a natural key, like an ISBN, for example, in the book table, and you ever change an ISBN. If you cascade the update, it'll make that ISBN then change in the sale table too. Now, because we're using auto numbers as the primary keys, and auto numbers can never be changed, then we don't have to worry about these cascading updates. So let's hit create. So it drew a little line, and it's got a little 1 here and a little infinity symbol here. What this means is that one book can be sold multiple times, but each sale can only be for one book. If a customer buys more than one book, we would just enter more than one record in the sale table. Now let's do the same with customer ID. We're going to drag it from the customer table and drop it on top of this customer ID field in the sale table. Give us another pop-up, and again what it's saying is the customer ID must exist in the customer table before that customer ID can exist in the sale table. Enforce our integrity, hit create. So one customer can have many sales, but a given sale is only for one customer. So now we've created our relationships. So let's hit save, close. Okay. Now all we have to do is enter some sale data. So here's our sale table. Now the sale ID will be auto-generated, so skip that column. So let's see how many book IDs we have. We have 1, 2, and 3. So I need to put either a 1, 2, or 3. Let's say book ID 1 was sold to customer ID 2. Let's say the customer bought one of them. When you have a date time field, it gives you a little calendar you can use to pick the date. So okay, this is one sale. So in this sale, customer ID 2 bought book ID 1. They bought one copy on this date. Let's say this customer also bought book 2. Oops. Sales date. Okay, it thinks I'm trying to change rows. That's why it's giving me that error. Okay. And let's say the customer bought 3 copies of this. Let's say it was on the same day. Okay. So what this means is that on the 27th, customer 2, which is who? That's Bob Jones, bought one copy of book 1, so he bought one copy of War and Peace, and he bought 3 copies of book 2, which is The Old Man and the Sea. Okay, so let's say we have book ID 1, let's say was, book ID 1 was also bought, let's say by customer 3, one copy, let's say that was on the 26th. Okay, just adding some more data. Okay, so now what would happen, how many books do we have? We have 3. What would happen if I tried to say book ID 4 was purchased by customer 3? 1 copy. Same day. Now if I try to save this, you can see I get an error. So you cannot add or change a record because a related record is required in book. So it's basically saying there is no book ID 4 in the book table, so you can't sell that book because it doesn't exist. So the reason Access knows this is because we set up those relationships. So this is sort of protecting you from data errors. So let's change that to book 3, and now it lets us save. Okay, so this was an overview of tables, table data, relationships, and hopefully this will give you the knowledge you need to complete Lab 1. Now when you do Lab 1, just as a reminder, in addition to answering the questions in the lab, you're going to drop in a screenshot of the design view of each table. So I think the lab has 5 tables, so for example on each table you would right-click, Design View, take a screenshot, paste it into your Word document. For one table, go to your next table, grab another screenshot, paste that in, and then at the end you'll want one more screenshot of the relationships. So just Database Tools, Relationships, grab a screenshot of this and drop it in. And again, this is just an example I'm doing. The lab is not for bookstore, it's for a different assignment. But I just thought this would be helpful for everyone to get introduced to Access. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me, and I hope this was useful. Thank you.